The annual Chen family reunion was in full swing, the backyard of my parents' Seattle home filled with the chaos of relatives, the aroma of Mom's famous dumplings, and the weight of 5 years of disappointment. I stood by the koi pond, watching my reflection ripple in the water, wondering if today would be the day I finally told them the truth. I'm Emily Chen, though millions of readers know me as E.J. Winters, author of the internationally best-selling Midnight Chronicles series. Not that anyone at this gathering had a clue. To them, I was just the family failure, the daughter who gave up a respectable career in marketing to pursue her little writing hobby. Emily, my sister Grace's voice cut through my thoughts. She crossed the lawn in her designer dress, successful lawyer husband in tow. Mom says you're still living in that tiny apartment in Capitol Hill. You know, I have a friend at Microsoft looking for technical writers, something stable with benefits. I forced a smile, thinking about the penthouse I actually bought last month in downtown Seattle. I'm good, Grace. My writing is going well. She exchanged knowing looks with her husband. Sure, you're writing. How many rejection letters this year? You know, it's not too late to get a real job. The family name means something in this city. We could help. If only she knew that E.G. Winters had just signed a $15 million movie deal for the first book in the series. That my latest advance was more than she'd make in 5 years at her corporate law firm. That the little stories she mocked had sold 10 million copies worldwide. But that was the deal I'd made with myself 5 years ago when I started writing under a pseudonym. I wanted my work to succeed on its own merits, not because of or in spite of being a Chinese-American woman from a traditional family. E.G. Winters could be anyone. That was part of the mystique that drove readers crazy. Emily, Mom's voice called from the patio. Come help with the dumplings. I headed inside, passing cousins who whispered behind their hands, aunts who pointedly discussed their children's successes, and my father deep in conversation with Uncle Wei about his latest business venture. The kitchen was a steam-filled sanctuary where Mom pressed dumpling wrappers with practiced efficiency. Your cousin May just made partner at her firm, Mom said, not looking up. And your brother's new tech startup got another round of funding. That's great, Mom. I picked up a wrapper, muscle memory from childhood taking over. You know Mrs. Liu's daughter teaches creative writing at the community college. Maybe she could help you get a position there. Something reliable. I thought about the email I'd received this morning from my publisher. Time magazine wanted to do a cover story revealing E.G. Winters' true identity. 5 years of speculation had driven the mystery to a fever pitch, with online forums dedicated to unmasking the reclusive author. The timing was perfect. The final book in the series was coming out next month, and my agent said the revelation would send sales through the roof. But standing here in Mom's kitchen, folding dumplings like I had since I was tall enough to reach the counter, I wondered how they'd react. Would they be proud? Embarrassed that they doubted me? Angry that I kept it secret? Emily, are you listening? Mom's voice snapped me back. Mrs. Zhang's son just opened his third restaurant. He's single, you know. Very successful. Mom, I'm not interested in. The patio door slid open and Grace swept in. Emily, seriously, when are you going to grow up? Dad's getting embarrassed telling people his daughter is still writing. Do you know what that looks like? I did know. I'd seen Dad at business functions smoothly changing the subject when asked about his younger daughter. Watched him brag about Grace's law career and Michael's startup while avoiding any mention of my work. The irony was, my last royalty check could have bought both their companies outright. I have grown up, Grace. I'm doing exactly what I want to be doing. She rolled her eyes. Playing at being a writer in your little apartment, probably still working on that fantasy novel you started 5 years ago. Meanwhile, the rest of us are building real careers, having families, making something of ourselves. The weight of my phone in my pocket suddenly felt heavier. My agent had warned me the Time article would drop today. Any minute now, the world would know that E.J. Winters, the mystery author who'd captured millions of readers' imaginations, was actually the disappointing daughter of the Chen family. You know what? Grace continued, warming to her topic. This is exactly why Mom and Dad are so worried. You're living in a fantasy world, Emily. Real life isn't some magical story where everything works out in the end. It's time to. My phone buzzed. Then Grace's phone. Then Mom's. In the living room, I heard other phones starting to chime with notifications. Breaking news, Grace read from her screen, her voice faltering. Time magazine reveals identity of best-selling author E.J. Winters. The kitchen fell silent except for the soft bubbling of the soup on the stove. Through the window, I could see party guests pulling out their phones, expressions of shock spreading across their faces. The literary world's biggest mystery has been solved. Grace continued reading, her face growing pale. E.G. Winters, author of the phenomenally successful Midnight Chronicles series, is revealed to be Emily Chen, 28, of Seattle. The dumpling wrapper slipped from Mom's fingers. In the sudden silence, I could hear Dad in the living room, his voice rising in disbelief as Uncle Wei apparently showed him the article on his phone. My own phone buzzed again. My agent calling, right on schedule. I picked up, putting it on speaker. Emily, it's happening. Time to drop the article, and it's perfect. Your social media is exploding, the publisher's phones are ringing off the hook, and Hollywood's already calling about fast-tracking the movie. You're trending #1 worldwide. Grace stood frozen, the phone still in her hand, the article still displaying my author photo, the professional one I'd taken months ago, not the casual family snapshot they were used to seeing. Thanks, Angela, I said calmly. How's the stock doing? Through the roof. The publisher's share price jumped 20% on the news. Your personal brand value is estimated at around $40 million now. And that's before the movie revenue starts coming in. Mom sat down heavily in one of the kitchen chairs. Through the patio doors, I could see relatives huddled in groups, all staring at their phones, then looking toward the kitchen with wide eyes. Perfect timing, too, Angela continued, oblivious to the chaos she was causing. Time wants to do a full cover shoot next week, and there's already talk about a bidding war for your next series. Will you be free for meetings on Monday? We should strike while the iron's hot. I'll be there, I said, then added with a small smile. I don't have any other commitments. I ended the call and looked at my sister. Grace's face had gone through an impressive range of emotions in the past few minutes, finally settling on something between shock and embarrassment. 40 million, she whispered. Give or take, I said, picking up another dumpling wrapper. The movie deal might push it higher. We'll see how the international rights work out. Dad appeared in the doorway, Uncle Wide behind him clutching a tablet displaying what looked like my Amazon author page, complete with its impressive sales rankings. Emily, Dad said, his voice unsteady. Is this real? I met his eyes, seeing the confusion, the disbelief, and something else. Something that looked surprisingly like pride. It's real, Dad. I've been E.J. Winters for 5 years now. The little stories Grace mentioned, they've sold 10 million copies in 28 languages. That fantasy novel I was still working on. It's being made into a movie starring Emma Stone. The kitchen erupted in chaos as relatives began pouring in, all talking at once. Phones were thrust in my face showing articles, social media posts, and most surreal of all, my author photo on Time magazine's website with the headline, REVALED, the true identity of America's most mysterious author. But through it all, I kept folding dumplings, just like Mom had taught me, because success hadn't changed who I was. It had just finally allowed me to show them who I'd been all along. The next hour at the family reunion was surreal. Relatives who'd spent years pitying me now crowded around, their phones displaying my book covers, asking for autographs. Cousin May, who'd never shown interest in my writing, suddenly revealed she was a huge fan of the Midnight Chronicles series. I can't believe I've been reading your books all this time, she gushed. That plot twist in book 3, I called in sick to work to finish it. Grace sat at the kitchen table, methodically Googling every article she could find about E.G. Winters. I watched her face as she discovered just how wrong she'd been about her failing little sister. Forbes articles about the publishing phenomenon. Entertainment Weekly covering the movie deal. The New York Times review that had called my latest book a masterpiece of modern fantasy. Mom hadn't spoken for 20 minutes, which might have been a record. She stood at the stove, mechanically stirring the soup, while Dad fielded excited phone calls from what seemed like every Chinese family in Seattle. Emily, he said, covering his phone's microphone. The Wongs want to know if their daughter can interview you for her school newspaper. And the Leas? Well, their son is still single. Of modern fantasy. Dad, I interrupted gently, I think we need to talk. As a family. He nodded, something shifting in his expression. Everyone out. He announced to the crowd of relatives. Family meeting. Private. There was some grumbling, but the authority in Dad's voice was absolute. Soon it was just the four of us. Mom, Dad, Grace, and me, sitting around the kitchen table where we'd had so many family dinners, arguments, and life discussions. "Why didn't you tell us?" Grace asked finally, her voice small. "All these years while I was being incredibly condescending," I supplied. "Treating me like a failure, trying to fix my life." Mom flinched. Dad stared at his hands. "I wanted to prove something," I continued more gently. "Not to you exactly, to myself. I wanted to know if I could succeed on my own merits without the family name, without anyone's help or influence. Just my words, my stories, connecting with readers." "But why the secrecy?" Dad asked. "We could have supported you, been proud of you." "Could you?" I looked at him directly. "Before today, were you proud of me writing fantasy novels? Or were you embarrassed to tell your business friends that your daughter wasn't following the traditional path?" The silence was answer enough. I chose E.J. Winters because I wanted readers to judge the books, not my age or gender or ethnicity. But I kept it secret from you because I took a deep breath. Because I needed to believe in myself without your approval. I needed to know I could do it even if you thought I was failing. Mom suddenly stood up and walked to the cabinet where she kept her most treasured possessions. She returned with a familiar-looking book, my first novel, well-worn, pages marked with sticky notes. "I bought this when it first came out," she said quietly. "Everyone was talking about this amazing new author, E.J. Winters. I read it in one night. It reminded me of the stories my mother used to tell me, but different, modern. I was so moved, I wrote a review online, my first ever." I stared at her, remembering a particularly touching review from the early days, signed simply, "Proud Chinese Mom." "That was you." She nodded, tears in her eyes. "I never told anyone because I was afraid they'd laugh at me for reading fantasy novels at my age. And now I find out my own daughter wrote it." She laughed through her tears. "We are very good at keeping secrets in this family, aren't we?" Grace reached into her designer purse and pulled out a hardcover, my latest book. "I have all of them too," she admitted. "I tell everyone they're for my kids, but," she shrugged, "I've read each one at least 3 times." Dad cleared his throat. "I may have the audiobooks on my phone. For my commute." We all stared at each other, then burst out laughing, years of pretense and judgment dissolving in the absurdity of it all. "So," Grace said finally, "my little sister is a multimillionaire literary superstar. And my daughter," Mom added, "is going to be on the cover of Time magazine." "About that," I said, pulling out my phone. "The photographer asked if we can do the shoot here, at home. He thinks it would be meaningful to show where E.J. Winters really comes from, but only if you're comfortable with it." "Here?" Mom looked around her kitchen with new eyes. "But it's so ordinary." "It's perfect," I said firmly. "This kitchen, these dumplings, these conversations, they're all part of who I am, part of the stories I tell. I'd like the world to see that." Dad stood up suddenly. "We need to celebrate properly. Grace, call your brother. Tell him to close his fancy startup office early for once. Mom, we need more food. Enough for everyone to come back. Emily," he paused, then smiled. "Would you sign my audiobooks?" The next few weeks were a whirlwind. The Time photoshoot turned our home into a glimpse into the real world of E.J. Winters. Shots of Mom teaching me to make dumplings, Dad proudly holding all my books, Grace and me laughing over childhood photos. The article titled "The Family Behind the Fantasy" went viral. My publisher organized a special event at Seattle's largest bookstore. The line of fans stretched for blocks, but at the front of the line stood my family. Mom, Dad, Grace, Michael, aunts, uncles, cousins, all wearing custom t-shirts that read E.J. Winters' biggest fans since before she was famous. We just didn't know it. The movie producers flew in for meetings, and this time when Dad hosted them at his office, he proudly introduced me as my daughter, the author. Mom started a book club specifically for parents of writers, teaching them to support their children's creative dreams. Grace quit her corporate law firm to start a practice representing artists and authors, saying she found her true calling. But the real change wasn't in the public celebrations or career shifts. It was in the quiet moments, Mom asking to read my early drafts, Dad calling for writing updates instead of job hunting suggestions, Grace admitting she'd started writing her own novel in secret. 6 months after the revelation, we sat around the same kitchen table for our weekly family dinner. My new book, the first published under my real name, lay on the counter, The Taste of Memory by Emily Chen, a story about a Chinese-American family, magic hidden in ordinary moments, and the power of being truly seen. I have a confession, Mom said, setting down her chopsticks. I may have told Mrs. Liu's son that you're too busy with your writing to date right now. Mom. But I was laughing. What? My daughter is a famous author. He should have read your books first at least. Dad shook his head, but he was smiling too. Your mother has become quite the literary critic. She told the Wangs their daughter's school newspaper interview questions weren't sophisticated enough. They weren't, Mom protested. They didn't ask anything about the symbolic significance of food in modern fantasy literature. Grace looked up from her laptop where she'd been secretly working on her novel. Mom's right. The food scenes in Emily's books are legendary. Remember the viral TikTok trend of people trying to recreate the magical dumplings from book 4? Speaking of which, I said, I may have based those dumplings on your recipe, Mom. The one you're teaching me tonight? Mom's eyes widened. My dumplings are going to be in the movie. Emma Stone specifically requested the scene. She wants you to teach her how to make them properly. The kitchen erupted in excited chatter about Hollywood stars and dumpling techniques. I sat back, watching my family, really seeing them, just as they finally saw me. Success, I've learned, isn't just about proving yourself to others. Sometimes it's about giving others permission to be themselves too. Mom now proudly tells everyone she reads fantasy novels. Dad has started writing down the old stories his grandmother told him. Grace is discovering her creative voice. My phone buzzed. Another email about the movie, the book tour, the next project. But for now, I was exactly where I needed to be, in my mother's kitchen, learning once again how to fold dumplings perfectly, surrounded by the love that had always been there, just waiting for the right story to bring it into the light. Later that night, as I was leaving, Dad pulled me aside. You know, he said quietly, I kept every rejection letter you ever received, and every review of E.G. Winter's books. I couldn't tell you then, but I always believed you would succeed, because you're a Chen and Chens don't give up. I hugged him, smelling the familiar mix of his aftershave and Mom's cooking. No, I agreed, we just find our own path to success. And sometimes, he added with a smile, the longest path leads us right back home. As I drove back to my penthouse, I thought about success, family, and the stories we tell ourselves. E.G. Winters had brought me fame and fortune, but Emily Chen had brought me something far more valuable, the chance to be truly known and loved for exactly who I am. My next book would be dedicated to my family, who taught me that every great story begins at home.